It was exactly 4:11 on a freezing Tuesday morning in Savannah when I walked out of that house forever. My brother received a brand new car for graduating. While I was handed a bill for $850 in rent, they think I left because I was pouting, but they are wrong. The folded paper I left by the coffee maker is not a goodbye note. It is a receipt, and it is going to cost them everything they have tried to hide. My name is Mackenzie Cruz, and the silence of the house in the dark was heavier than the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The air in the hallway was stale, smelling faintly of the lemon polish my mother, Lydia, insisted on using every Sunday, and the lingering, celebratory scent of the expensive roast beef we had eaten 7 hours ago. I moved like a ghost in the home where I had lived for 22 years. I knew exactly where to step. Avoid the center of the third stair. It groaned like a dying animal. Skip the floorboard just outside the master bedroom. It snapped loud enough to wake the dead. I had spent my entire life learning how to move around my family without making a sound, shrinking myself until I took up no space at all. I reached the kitchen, the granite countertops gleaming in the pale blue light of the microwave clock. My eyes darted to the stainless steel coffee maker. It was Grant's morning altar. He would be here in exactly 2 hours and 49 minutes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the piece of paper. I had folded it once, crisp and sharp. It wasn't a letter. There were no tearful goodbyes, no accusations of cruelty, no emotional pleas for understanding. It was a ledger, a list. I placed it right next to the brew button. He would see it before he even saw the sun. As I stood there, the cold from the tile floor seeping through my sneakers, the scene from dinner played back in my mind with agonizing clarity. It had been a coronation. My brother, Miles, sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with wine and the arrogance of a man who has never been told no. He had just graduated, a feat the family treated as if he had personally invented electricity. Grant stood up, tapping his fork against a crystal wine glass. The sound was sharp, demanding attention. He made a toast about legacy, about the future, about how Miles was the torchbearer of the Cruz name. Then, with a flourish that felt rehearsed, he dropped a set of keys onto the table. Not a used sedan, not a hand-me-down, but a brand new SUV with that distinct, chemically sweet smell of fresh leather. Miles had whooped, snatching the keys, while Lydia dabbed at her dry eyes, murmuring about how proud she was. Then, Grant had turned to me. The smile didn't leave his face, but the warmth evaporated from his eyes. He looked at me the way one looks at a smudge on a window. "And for you, Mackenzie," he had said, his voice dropping to that reasonable, businesslike baritone he used to mask his cruelty. "Now that Miles is set, we need to talk about your contribution. You're an adult. Living here costs money. Starting the first of the month, your rent is $850. The room had gone quiet. $850. I hadn't gasped. I hadn't cried. I had just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, doing the math. I worked part-time shifts that barely covered my own groceries and gas for the beat-up sedan I had bought myself 3 years ago. That number wasn't just rent. It was an eviction notice disguised as a bill. It was designed to drain every cent I managed to save, ensuring I could never afford a deposit on my own apartment. It was a leash, pulled tight to keep me right here, serving them. "That seems fair, doesn't it?" Grant had asked. But he hadn't been looking at me. That was the detail that clawed at me now as I stood in the dark kitchen. When Grant named the price, his eyes had flickered away. He hadn't looked at Miles, or Lydia, or even the ceiling. He had looked past me, through the open archway, directly at the heavy oak door of his home office. Specifically, at the corner where the locked filing cabinet stood. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but I had seen it. Why would asking me for rent make him look at his tax records? I had played my part perfectly, the role of the gap filler, the background character. I simply nodded, picked up the water pitcher, and refilled everyone's glasses. I cleared the plates, I washed the fine china by hand because Lydia said the dishwasher made the gold rim fade. I scrubbed the grease off the roasting pan while they laughed in the living room, discussing the road trip Miles would take in his new car. "You have to be realistic, Mackenzie," was the family motto printed on my soul. Miles was allowed to dream. I was required to be realistic. Being realistic meant accepting that I was the one who cleaned up the messes. I was the one who apologized when the mood was off. I was the one who stayed small so they could feel big. But they didn't know about the other life I lived between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. They didn't know about the online shop I ran from my laptop, selling digital art and custom craft designs. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady. Every sale was a deposit into an account they didn't have access to. Every $5 transaction was a brick in a wall I was building between me and them. That shop was my oxygen. It was the only thing in this world that was mine. I adjusted the strap of the duffel bag on my shoulder. It was light, terrifyingly so. My entire life, distilled down to the essentials. My laptop was wedged against my back. Wrapped in a thick sweater was the small, velvet-lined box of keepsakes from Grandma Evelyn. And at the very bottom, beneath my socks and underwear, was the stack of papers. I had found them in the attic months ago, tucked inside an old recipe book of Grandma's. I had never dared to read them all the way through. The legal jargon was dense, and the few phrases I had caught, beneficiary, trust, revocation, had terrified me. I didn't understand them yet, but I knew they were dangerous. They felt hot to the touch, like a live wire. I took one last look at the kitchen. The stainless steel appliances reflected my silhouette, a dark shape with no features. That was how they saw me, a shadow, a utility. I turned the deadbolt on the back door. It slid back with a soft, well-oiled click. I had greased it myself 2 days ago in preparation. Stepping out into the Georgia darkness, the cold air bit at my cheeks. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long orange pools of light on the pavement. I didn't look back at the house. If I looked back, I might remember that I had nowhere to go but a stranger's mercy in North Carolina. If I looked back, I might crumble. I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, the wheels of my bag humming against the concrete. The bus to the depot was due in 7 minutes. From there, I would catch the first Greyhound heading north. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen glowed with the time. 4:22 in the morning. I held the power button down. The screen went black. Grant would wake up. He would find the note. He would check my room and find it empty. He would rage. He would call the police and tell them his unstable daughter had run off. He would try to spin the narrative, just like he always did. He would look for me in the places a scared child would go. But I wasn't a scared child anymore. I was a woman who had just realized that the rent wasn't about money. It was about control. And the car wasn't a gift. It was a bribe. As the bus headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the swirling mist, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. They would look for me. Certainly. They would tear the city apart trying to bring me back under their thumb. But they would be looking for the wrong thing. They should be looking for what I took with me. Because once I learned how to read those papers in my bag, I wasn't just going to be the girl who left. I was going to be the storm that came back. This wasn't the first time I had been made to pay for my brother's mistakes, though it was certainly the most expensive. The dynamic had been set in stone years ago. On a humid July afternoon when Miles was 16, he had taken the family's station wagon for a joyride before he even had his learner's permit, and promptly wrapped the front bumper around the neighbor's brick mailbox. I was 14 at the time, sitting on the front porch reading a book when he pulled out of the driveway. When Grant came home to the smoking ruin of the radiator, he didn't scream at Miles. He turned to me, his face purple with a vein throbbing in his temple, and asked why I hadn't taken the keys from him. He asked why I had let my older brother ruin their property. I remember staring at him, baffled by the physics of his accusation, realizing for the first time that in the Cruz household, Miles was the protagonist who made things happen, and I was merely the scenery expected to absorb the impact. My mother, Lydia, had smoothed it over with the sentence that became the soundtrack of my adolescence. "I just want peace," she had said, pouring Grant a scotch and handing me a broom to sweep up the broken taillight glass. That phrase was her shield. It sounded like a plea for harmony, but it was actually a demand for silence. It meant that whoever was complaining about the unfairness was the one causing the trouble, not the person who committed the unfair act. To Lydia, justice wasn't as important as a quiet evening. That philosophy had brought us to last night. The warning signs had been there the moment I saw the table set. We were using the good china, the delicate porcelain with the gold leaf edges that usually stayed behind glass in the hutch. In any other family, fine china means a celebration. In our house, it meant a boardroom meeting disguised as a meal. It meant Grant had an agenda to push, and he wanted the setting to be formal enough that no one would dare interrupt him. I had spent the last 4 years juggling community college classes and 2 different jobs, one at a print shop, one managing social media for local businesses, while Miles had been allowed to, as Grant put it, focus on his potential. Focusing on his potential apparently involved a lot of fraternity parties, 3 changes of major, and an allowance that eclipsed what I made in a month. I paid for my own textbooks, my own gas, and my own clothes. Miles simply forwarded his bills to Grant's office, so when we sat down to the roast beef, I knew something was coming. Grant was too jovial. He poured the wine with a little too much flourish. After the car keys were handed over and the applause had died down, the air in the room shifted. It became dense, pressurized. Grant leaned back in his chair, swirling his Cabernet, and leveled that heavy paternal gaze on me. "Mackenzie," he started, his voice dripping with that reasonable, calm tone that made you feel crazy for getting upset. "We have been looking at the finances. Now that you are working so steadily, we think it is time you learned the value of $1 in the real world. A contribution of $850 a month will teach you responsibility." He called it a contribution. He called it a lesson. But I did the math instantly. It was almost exactly what I managed to save every month after my basic expenses. It wasn't a contribution. It was a cap. It was a ceiling installed just above my head to keep me from growing taller than the house allowed. "Miles lived here for free until he was 24, I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "He didn't have a job. I have 2. Why am I being charged for being employed?" Grant's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. Miles was focusing on his studies. "You have chosen a different path. You are working. That makes you a tenant. And tenants pay rent. It is a simple matter of economics. Mackenzie, do not be dramatic." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Miles was allowed to be a child because he was the heir. I was required to be an adult because I was the spare. I was being fined for my competence. I turned to Lydia. She was sitting to my right, picking at a loose thread on the placemat. She knew this was wrong. She knew exactly how much I struggled to keep my tuition payments current. She knew that $850 would force me to drop classes or pick up a 3rd shift, effectively killing my chances of graduating anytime soon. "Mom?" I asked. It was a quiet word, a final test. Lydia didn't look at me. She lifted her hand and examined her manicure, frowning slightly at a chipped edge on her thumb. "Mackenzie, honey," she said, her voice airy and detached. "Your father is right. You need to grow up. We can't support you forever. We just want everyone to be responsible." There it was. The betrayal wasn't a knife in the back. It was a sigh and a look away. She wasn't just wanting peace. She was choosing her comfort over my survival. She was looking at her fingernails while her husband dismantled my future. I didn't argue further. I didn't flip the table or throw the wine in Grant's face, no matter how much every nerve ending in my body wanted to. I nodded. I picked up my fork. I ate the roast beef, which tasted like ash in my mouth. When dinner ended, Miles and Grant moved to the living room to watch the game on the big screen, laughing about the horsepower in the new SUV. Lydia went upstairs to start her nightly skincare routine. leaving the battlefield without glancing at the casualties. I stood at the kitchen sink, my hands submerged in hot, soapy water. The foam hissed as the bubbles popped. From the other room, I could hear the roar of the television and the clinking of glasses. They were celebrating. They were happy. And they were happy because they believed the problem of Mackenzie had been solved. They had put me in a box, nailed the lid shut, and labeled it revenue stream. I scrubbed a plate until my knuckles turned white. In that moment, the anger that had been simmering in me for years, the hot resentment of being the invisible daughter, cooled down into something far more dangerous. It crystallized. If I stayed and paid the rent, I wasn't just a victim, I was a volunteer. Silence wasn't keeping the peace. Silence was signing the contract. By washing these dishes without complaint, I was telling them that this was okay. I was telling them that I accepted my role as the financier of Miles's freedom. I rinsed the plate and placed it in the rack with deliberate care. I didn't slam it. I dried my hands on the towel, folded it neatly, and hung it over the oven handle. I wasn't going to scream. Screaming was what children did, and they had just told me I needed to be an adult. So I would be an adult. I would be the most cold, calculating, realistic adult they had ever met. I walked past the living room where Grant was explaining the features of the new car to Miles. They didn't even look up. They didn't see me. That was fine. They didn't need to see me. They just needed to see what I was about to do. I wasn't going up to my room to cry into my pillow. I was going up there to pack. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to raise the stakes. The rebellion wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be total. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my bedroom, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the stark reality of my situation. It was midnight. I had exactly 4 hours until I needed to be downstairs. The emotions from dinner had been packed away, replaced by the cold, hard logic of logistics. If I was going to do this, I had to do it with the precision of a military operation. Grant would not just be angry, he would be vindictive. If he found me, he would drag me back, likely using the police to claim I was having a mental breakdown. I needed to be invisible. I opened a private browsing window and pulled up the Greyhound bus schedules. The destination was Boone, North Carolina. It was far enough to be a disconnect, but close enough to reach on a single tank of adrenaline. The ticket cost $64. I paid for it using a prepaid Visa card I had bought at the grocery store 3 weeks ago for online subscriptions I didn't want Grant to track. No paper trail, no credit card statement appearing on his desk at the end of the month. Next came the money. This was the most dangerous part of the night. My primary checking account was technically a joint student account Grant had opened for me when I was 18. He could see every transaction. He used it to monitor my spending. Questioning every coffee or book purchase, I logged in, my fingers hovering over the transfer button. I had $2,340 saved from my side business. It wasn't a fortune, but it was my ransom. I initiated a transfer, not to another bank, which would take days, but to my PayPal balance, and then immediately pushed it to a completely separate, online-only bank account I had opened under my own name 6 months ago. The screen buffered. I held my breath. When the confirmation checkmark appeared, I exhaled. I left exactly $5 in the joint account, just enough to keep it open. A ghostly reminder of the patronage I was rejecting. Then, I went to work on the passwords. Grant had the master passwords to everything, my email, my social media, even my university portal. He claimed it was for safety. In case of an emergency, I changed them all, every single one. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything, linking it to a burner phone app rather than my primary number, just in case he tried to port my SIM card. With every password changed, I felt a heavy chain falling off my chest. I was digitally sealing the doors, with the cyber trail cold. I turned to the physical. My duffel bag lay open on the bed. I couldn't take much. Clothes were heavy and replaceable. Identity was not. I packed 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, and my sturdy boots. Then I reached under my bed for the shoebox. This was the only thing in the house that truly mattered. It had belonged to Grandma Evelyn Cruz. She had passed away 4 years ago, and she was the only person in this family who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a servant. I remembered the day she gave it to me. She was frail, sitting in her sunroom, her hands shaking as she pressed the box into mine. She had whispered that I was the smart one, the one with the spine. Even if my father tried to break it, I opened the lid. Inside were the fragments of a history Grant had tried to rewrite. There were old savings bonds in my name that had vanished from the official family records. There were handwritten letters from Evelyn to me, detailing promises Grant had made about my college fund. Promises he had broken the second Miles decided he wanted to go to a private university. And then there was the thick envelope at the bottom. I pulled it out. It contained a copy of a legal document, stamped and notarized, dated 5 years ago. I had glanced at it before, but the legal language was dense, full of words like irrevocable trust and fiduciary duty. I didn't fully understand what it meant yet, but I knew it was important because Grant had told everyone that Grandma died without a will. This piece of paper suggested otherwise. I slid the envelope into the laptop sleeve, right against the computer's metal casing. It was my insurance policy. Finally, I sat at my desk to write the note. The outline in my head was clear. No feelings, no tears. Grant didn't care about my feelings, so I wouldn't waste ink on them. I took a sheet of plain white printer paper and a black pen. I wrote it like a balance sheet, a ledger of debts paid and owed. Item 1, broken window. Summer of 2018. Cost, $300. Paid by Mackenzie's babysitting money. Item 2, Miles's legal fees for the noise complaint. Fall of 2020. Cost, $500. Paid by Mackenzie's tuition refund. Item 3, housekeeping, cooking, and emotional management. 2012 to present. Cost, incalculable. Item 4, rent demanded, $850 per month. Status, declined. My hand didn't shake. The ink flowed smooth and dark. I was accounting for every time they had made me feel like a burden. Flipping the script to show exactly who had been carrying whom, I listed the missed opportunities, the hours spent cleaning up after Miles, the silence I had purchased with my obedience. At the bottom of the page, I didn't sign my name. I didn't write love, Mackenzie. Instead, I wrote the sentence that would haunt them more than any scream ever could. Do not look for me. Look for what you hid. I folded the paper precisely in half. It was sharp enough to cut. As I zipped up the bag, I heard footsteps in the hallway. My heart stopped. It was Miles. He was pacing outside my door, talking on his phone. His voice was loud, unbothered, drifting through the wood. "Yeah, man, the car is a beast," he was saying. "Dad came through. I'm telling you, my life is just starting. No more school. Got the ride. Got the job lined up at Dad's firm. It's go time." I stood frozen in the dark, listening to him brag about a life that had been handed to him on a silver platter. Garnished with my future, he thought his life was starting because he had been given a set of keys. He had no idea what it actually meant to start a life. He walked away, his door clicking shut down the hall. The silence returned. I looked around my room one last time. It looked the same as it always had. But it wasn't my room anymore. It was just a box in a house owned by strangers. Miles was wrong. His life wasn't starting. His script was just continuing. My life was starting the moment I walked out that door. I grabbed the duffel bag, the weight of it settling familiarly against my hip. I picked up the note. It was time to deliver the bill. The bus hissed as the pneumatic doors folded open, spilling me out into the crisp, mountain air of Boone, North Carolina. It was a sensory shock after the humid, suffocating blanket of Savannah. Here, the air tasted like pine needles and cold earth. The sky wasn't a hazy gray, but a piercing, impossible blue. I adjusted my duffel bag, the strap digging into a bruise that was already forming on my shoulder, and looked around. This town was vibrant, alive with college students rushing to morning classes, their laughter echoing off the brick storefronts. It was a world away from the silent, museum-like quality of the house I had left behind. I walked 3 miles to the edge of town, where the houses were older and sat further back from the road, nestled into the sloping hills. I was looking for a specific mailbox. One painted a chaotic swirl of purple and orange. When I found it, a wave of relief so intense it nearly knocked me over washed through my chest. June Marlowe was waiting on the porch. She was my godmother, Grandma Evelyn's best friend, and the only person in the crew's orbit who had never bowed to Grant. She was 60-something, wearing oversized denim overalls covered in paint smears and a knitted cardigan that looked like it had been made from a dozen different sweaters. She held a mug of steaming tea in one hand and a cigarette in the other, watching me walk up the driveway with eyes that missed nothing. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, suddenly feeling very small and very young. "I left," I said, my voice cracking on the cool air. I couldn't do it anymore." June took a drag of her cigarette, exhaled a plume of smoke that drifted up into the maple tree, and shook her head. Her voice was gravel and honey. "You didn't run away. Mackenzie, don't let them tell you that. You are escaping. There is a difference." She opened the door and ushered me inside. If my parents' house was a sterile showroom where nothing could be touched, June's house was a living organism. It was a glorious, cluttered explosion of life. There were books stacked on every flat surface, hardcovers, paperbacks, magazines about pottery and politics. Plants trailed from the ceiling, their vines reaching down like green fingers. The air smelled of beeswax, old paper, and something savory simmering on the stove. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was real. "Put your bag anywhere that isn't a cat," June said, gesturing to a fat ginger tabby sleeping on a pile of newspapers. "I made stew. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal since Evelyn died." She wasn't wrong. I sat at her scratched oak kitchen table, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to pick up a fork. "Here is the rule," June said, setting a bowl down in front of me with a definitive thud. She sat opposite me, leaning forward, her elbows on the table. "You can stay here as long as you need, but you are not allowed to be invisible in this house, in that other place. Your survival depended on blending into the wallpaper. Here, you take up space, you speak up. If you drop a glass, you don't apologize for 5 minutes. You just sweep it up. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand." "Good. Now eat, then sleep, then we figure out the rest." The next 3 days were a blur of decompression. I expected Grant to burst through the door at any moment, but June had assured me that my phone was off and, more importantly, Grant was a coward who hated confrontation outside of his own territory. He wouldn't drive 6 hours to a house where he knew he couldn't control the narrative. I needed to work. It wasn't just about money. It was about establishing a routine that was mine. I walked into town and found a place called The Daily Grind, a combination-used bookstore and coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and vanilla. The manager, a woman with silver hair and a kind face, looked at my resume, which I had updated at the library, and hired me on the spot for the morning shift. It wasn't glamorous. It paid $12 an hour plus tips. But when I put on the green apron, I felt a strange sense of armor. I wasn't Mackenzie the disappointment. I was Mackenzie the barista. I was useful. I was independent. That night, my first night of real sleep, I lay in the guest room bed. The sheets were flannel, soft and worn, smelling of lavender laundry detergent. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight cutting through the curtains. I lay there, waiting for the tension to seize my muscles. For years, I had slept in a state of semi-alertness, listening for the sound of Grant's heavy footsteps or the crash of something breaking downstairs. My body was a coiled spring, ready to jump up and fix whatever had gone wrong. But here, the only sound was the wind in the trees and the rhythmic ticking of a clock in the hallway. Slowly, painfully, I felt my shoulders drop. I felt my jaw unclench. I realized with a start that I had been holding my breath for 22 years. The next morning, I brought the duffel bag into the living room. June was watering a monstrous fern by the window. I sat on the floor and pulled out the stack of papers, the ones from Grandma Evelyn's recipe book. June stopped watering. She turned and looked at the papers, then at me. Her expression softened, a mix of sadness and fierce pride. "She told me she left those for you," June said quietly. "She knew Grant would try to bury them. She just didn't know when you would be brave enough to find them." I ran my thumb over the edge of the envelope. "I don't even know what they say. I mean, I can read the words, but I don't know what they mean for me." June set the watering can down and sat on the sofa near me. She didn't reach for the papers. She respected my ownership of them. "We will go through them, but not today. Today, you just breathe. When you are ready to start the war, we will read them together." I nodded, sliding the papers back into the safety of the bag. Suddenly, a low vibration buzzed against the hardwood floor. It was my burner phone. I had turned it on just to check the battery, and now it was dancing across the floorboards. I looked at the screen. Incoming call, Grant Cruz. Then it stopped. Incoming call, Lydia Cruz. Then a text message notification. Then another. The screen lit up the dim room like a strobe light. June looked at the phone, then at me. She didn't tell me to answer it. She didn't tell me to ignore it. She let me choose. I stared at the glowing names. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to answer, to explain, to apologize. They weren't calling to ask if I was safe. They were calling because the bill had come due, and they didn't know how to pay it. I reached out and flipped the phone face down. The buzzing continued, muffled now against the rug, a distant, angry insect that couldn't sting me anymore. "Let it ring," I whispered. I wasn't ready to talk to them. I had something else I needed to listen to first. I looked at the duffel bag where the legal documents sat. I was done listening to their version of the story. It was time to read the truth. The morning sun sliced through the dusty windows of June's dining room, illuminating the kaleidoscope of documents spread across the oak table. It looked less like a breakfast nook and more like a crime scene investigation. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago. I sat frozen, my eyes glued to a bank statement dated 3 years prior, while June sat opposite me, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, her expression grim. We had spent the last 2 hours peeling back the layers of Grandma Evelyn's legacy. It wasn't just a recipe book. Tucked between the instructions for her famous pecan pie and the index cards for chicken dumplings were bank records, carbon copies of correspondence, and a notarized deed of trust. "Look at the date," June said, her finger tapping a line on the statement. "August 12th, 2022. I followed her finger. It was a withdrawal from an account titled the Evelyn Cruz Grandchild Trust. The beneficiary listed was Mackenzie Cruz, just me, not Miles, not Grant, me. The withdrawal amount was $12,000. The memo line read, "Educational expenses, M. Cruz." "I never received this," I whispered, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. That was the fall semester of my sophomore year. That was the semester Grant told me the family was going through a liquidity crunch. He said he couldn't help with tuition that term. I had to drop 3 classes and pick up double shifts at the print shop just to stay enrolled part-time. I nearly failed my biology final because I was so exhausted I fell asleep in the library. June pulled another sheet from the pile. It was a transfer receipt. "And look where it went. It didn't go to your university bursar. It went to a private account at a different bank, an account ending in 409. I knew that number. I had seen it on Miles's bank app once when he was bragging about his savings. It was his personal checking account. The air left my lungs. "He took my tuition money," I said, my voice flat. "And he gave it to Miles. It looks like he framed it as a generic M. Cruz expense, so the trustees wouldn't flag it," June said, her voice hard. "Miles is also M. Cruz. It is a shell game, Mackenzie. He moved the P so fast you never saw it." I felt a wave of nausea, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just favoritism, this was theft. Grandma Evelyn had left that money specifically for me, likely knowing Grant would favor Miles. And Grant had raided it, using my own name to cover his tracks, while watching me work myself into the ground. She knew, June said softly. Evelyn knew he would do this. That is why she kept these copies. She couldn't stop him from being the executor, but she could leave a trail. A memory flashed in my mind, vivid and sickening. It was a Tuesday evening, about a month before that withdrawal. I was in the kitchen, studying. Grant had come in, a stack of papers in his hand, looking harried and stressed. "Mackenzie, I need you to sign these," he had said, tossing a pen onto my notebook. "Just standard family tax updates. The accountant is breathing down my neck, and I need to get this filed by 5. I had reached for the papers to read them. "Don't bother with the fine print. Honey, it is just boring legalese," he had snapped, checking his watch. "Trust me, it is to keep your health insurance active. Just sign by the sticky note." And I had signed. I had signed because I was 19, because he was my father, and because I had been trained to make his life easier. "I signed a waiver," I said, looking up at June with horror. "I think I signed a waiver allowing him to reallocate funds. He tricked me." June stood up, scraping her chair against the floor. "Get your coat. We are going to town." 40 minutes later, we were sitting in a sterile, glass-walled office in downtown Boone. The sign on the door read, "Sterling Associates, Family Law and Financial Litigation." Caleb Sterling was nothing like the lawyers Grant used. Grant's lawyers were oily, expensive men in three-piece suits who smelled of cigars and condescension. Caleb was younger, maybe in his late 30s, with rolled-up sleeves and intense, tired eyes. He didn't look like he played golf. He looked like he fought wars. He listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the bank statements, the copy of the trust deed, and the timeline I wrote out on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tented his fingers. "This is classic fiduciary abuse," Caleb said. His voice was calm, clinical, which somehow made the situation feel more real. "The trust was established for your benefit. As the trustee, your father has a legal obligation to act in your best interest. Diverting funds to your brother, even if he shares your initials, is a breach of that duty. And if he coerced you into signing a waiver without allowing you to read it or consult counsel, that document is contestable. He will say I agreed to it," I said. "He will say, I wanted to help my brother." "He can say whatever he wants," Caleb countered. "But the forensic accounting tells a different story. You were working 2 jobs while this money was being drained. That does not look like the behavior of a beneficiary who voluntarily gifted her education fund to a sibling who was already fully supported. It looks like exploitation." Caleb pulled a file folder toward him. "Here is what we can do. We don't just sue for the money. We file for an emergency accounting and a temporary freeze on the trust assets. We allege mismanagement and potential fraud. This forces him to open his books, all of them, not just the trust, but the accounts the money flowed into." I sat there, processing the shift. For the last few days, I had just been trying to survive. I had been reacting to their cruelty. But this was an offensive strike. "I don't care about the money," I said, realizing it was true. "I mean, I do, but that's not why I want to do this." Caleb looked at me, raising an eyebrow. "Then why?" "Because he thinks he owns me," I said. "He thinks I am an asset he can liquidate whenever he needs cash for Miles. He thinks my signature is his property. I don't just want the $12,000 back. I want to burn down the idea that he has any right to control me." Caleb nodded slowly. He picked up a pen and clicked it. "That is the right answer. If we just ask for the money, he might cut a check to make you go away. He buys your silence. But if we challenge his trusteeship, if we accuse him of fraud," he looked me dead in the eye, "then we are not just taking his money, Mackenzie. We are taking his reputation. We are taking his control. And for a man like Grant Cruz, losing control is far worse than losing a bank balance." June reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was iron strong. "Do it," I said. Caleb began typing on his keyboard. The sound was rhythmic, like gunfire. I will draft the demand letter today. We will file the motion with the probate court in Savannah tomorrow morning. By the time your father sits down for lunch, his accounts will be flagged. He paused and looked at me one last time. You need to be ready. When he gets this, he's going to panic. He will try to call you. He will try to threaten you. He might even try to come here. Let him try, I said. I thought about the note I had left by the coffee maker. Look for what you hid. Grant thought I was talking about secrets. He didn't realize I was talking about the evidence of his own crimes. Caleb printed a document and slid it across the desk for me to sign. It was a retainer agreement. This time, I read every single word. I read the fine print. I read the clauses. I took my time. When I finally picked up the pen, my hand didn't shake. I signed my name, Mackenzie Cruz, not as a daughter obeying a command, but as a plaintiff initiating a war. One more thing, Caleb said as he took the paper back. If we go down this road, there is no turning back. This isn't a family dispute anymore. It is a legal battle. He will lose his standing in the community if this comes out. Are you prepared for them to hate you? I thought about the rental bill. I thought about the car. I thought about Miles laughing about his new life while I scrubbed his dishes. They don't hate me, I said. They just don't care about me. And frankly, I prefer their hatred. At least hatred requires them to acknowledge I exist. Caleb smiled. A sharp, dangerous smile. Good, because by next week, they are going to think about nothing else. The vibration of my phone against the wooden surface of June's kitchen table sounded less like a notification and more like a drill boring into the piece I had spent the last 72 hours building. I had turned the device back on at Caleb's instruction, but I had set it to silent. It didn't matter. The screen lit up every few minutes, a strobe light of guilt and manipulation. I sat there, watching the names scroll by. Mom, Mom, Dad, Miles, Mom. I reached out and touched the screen, opening the thread with Lydia. Her messages had undergone a fascinating evolution over the last day. The first few had been frantic, bordering on hysterical. Where are you? Please pick up. We are worried sick. But as the hours stretched into a day, and then two, the panic had calcified into something sharper, colder. The mother who was worried sick had been replaced by the woman who was worried about appearances. Your Aunt Sarah called asking why you weren't at Sunday dinner. The latest text read, I had to lie and say you were sick. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? You are making a scene over nothing. I scrolled down. If you don't come back by tomorrow, I don't know what I will tell the neighbors. You are being incredibly selfish. Mackenzie, think about the family. There it was. Not are you hungry? Not do you have a place to sleep? Just think about the family that had just tried to bill me for existing. Don't reply, June said from the stove, where she was stirring a pot of oatmeal. She didn't even turn around. Every time you engage, you give them fuel. Right now, they are running on fumes. She says I'm embarrassing them, I said, reading the screen. Good, June said, tapping the spoon against the pot. Embarrassment is the only thing people like that understand. It is their currency. You just devalued it. I opened the voicemail tab. There was one new message from Grant. I pressed speakerphone. His voice filled the small kitchen, booming and authoritative, devoid of any warmth. It was the voice he used when he was closing a deal with a difficult client. Mackenzie, this has gone on long enough, Grant said. There was no hello, no sweetheart. We are willing to overlook this little temper tantrum if you come home tonight. I will even waive the first month's rent we discussed, just until you get your feet back under you. But you need to be here by 6. We have guests coming this weekend, and I expect this family to be whole. Do not test me on this. The message ended with a sharp click. I looked at June. He's negotiating. He thinks this is a contract dispute. He thinks he is generous, June corrected, setting a bowl of oatmeal in front of me. He is offering to let you come back to the prison he built, and he is offering to waive the fee for the cell. How kind. Then there was Miles. His texts were the most confusing. A bizarre mix of brotherly annoyance and defensive posturing. "Bro, you need to chill." He wrote, "Dad is freaking out. I didn't ask for the money, okay? It just happened. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Just come home. It's weird without you doing the stuff around the house. Doing the stuff around the house, that was me to him. I wasn't his sister, I was the staff. I was the infrastructure that made his life seamless." "Save it all," June instructed, pulling a notepad from her apron pocket. "Screenshots, timestamps, we don't delete anything. If he leaves a voicemail, we back it up to the cloud. If Lydia sends a guilt trip, we file it. This isn't communication anymore. Mackenzie, this is evidence." I spent the next hour doing exactly that. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Correspondence, organized by date and sender. It felt cold to treat my family like hostile witnesses, but every time I read Grant's demand to be home by 6, the steel in my spine stiffened. At 10 o'clock, Caleb Sterling called. "The letter is out," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "We sent it via courier and certified mail this morning. It demands a full accounting of the Evelyn Cruz Trust from inception to present day. We have also formally requested copies of all authorization forms regarding the educational expense transfer." "How long does he have?" I asked. "Legally, we gave him 5 business days to respond before we file for a court-ordered subpoena," Caleb explained. "But practically, he is going to react immediately. Men like your father do not like being asked to show their homework. He is going to try to control the narrative before the facts come out." Caleb was right. The reaction didn't come to me directly. It came through the grapevine, that insidious network of small-town gossip that Grant knew how to play like a harp. Around noon, I got a message on Facebook from a girl I had gone to high school with, someone I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "Hey, Kenzie." It read, "I just heard from my mom who talked to your dad at the grocery store. She said you're having some kind of mental health crisis and ran off. Is everything okay? Your dad said they're looking into getting you some professional help when you get back." I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. "He's telling people I'm crazy," I whispered. "He's saying I'm unstable." June looked over my shoulder, reading the message. Her jaw tightened. "Of course he is. If you are crazy, then your accusations are just delusions. If you are having a breakdown, then he isn't a thief. He is a concerned father trying to manage a sick daughter. It is the oldest trick in the book." "It's working," I said, feeling the walls closing in. "People will believe him. He's Grant Cruz. He's a pillar of the community. I'm just the dropout who works at a print shop." "You are not a dropout, and you are not alone," June said firmly, grabbing my shoulders and turning me to face her. "He is trying to isolate you. He wants you to feel so ashamed and small that you crawl back into the hole he dug for you. But you have me, you have Caleb, and you have the truth. The truth doesn't care if he's a pillar of the community. Math doesn't care about his reputation. The numbers in that bank account are going to speak louder than any rumor he spreads at the grocery store." I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. June was right. He was loud, but we were accurate. He had stories. We had receipts. I didn't reply to the high school friend. I took a screenshot of the message and dragged it into the evidence folder. Attempt to discredit witness. I typed in the file description. By late afternoon, the barrage of messages had slowed. It was the calm before the storm. Grant had received the legal letter by now. I imagined him sitting in his leather chair, the heavy cream paper shaking in his hands, realizing that his unstable daughter had just hired a forensic accountant. I was sitting on June's porch, watching the sun dip behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, when my phone buzzed one more time. I expected another threat from Grant, or a plea from Lydia, but the number on the screen was unfamiliar. It had a local area code, but it wasn't saved in my contacts. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Then, curiosity won out. I opened the message. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a question. "I heard you left." The text read, And I heard Grant is telling people you lost your mind. I know that's not true. I stared at it. Who is this? I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. 3 dots danced on the screen. Then, a second message appeared. I know about the papers Miles signed last year. I was there when he joked about signing his life away for the trust money. I have something you need to hear. It's a recording. My heart hammered against my ribs. A recording. Who is this? I asked again. The answer came back a moment later. A name that made the entire puzzle click into place. A name that meant Grant had made enemies in places he didn't even realize. This is Tessa Lane, the message said. Miles's ex, meet me. I lowered the phone, the cool evening air suddenly feeling charged with electricity. Grant thought he had covered all his bases. He thought he had silenced everyone, but he had forgotten the one variable he couldn't control, the people Miles had discarded along the way. I stood up and walked back into the house. June looked up from her book. Everything okay? She asked. Better than okay, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. We just got a witness. I met Tessa Lane at a roadside diner halfway between Savannah and Boone. It was a neutral ground, a place smelling of burnt coffee and diesel, where nobody knew the name Cruz. I hadn't seen her in 18 months. Since the day she abruptly stopped coming to Sunday dinners, she looked different now. The nervous energy that used to make her pick at her cuticles was gone, replaced by a sharp, watchful stillness. She wore a leather jacket and boots that looked like they had seen Miles. She didn't hug me. She just nodded at the booth opposite her and pushed a menu toward me. I saw the post your dad's friends are sharing, Tessa said, her voice low but clear. They are saying you had a breakdown, that you are off your meds. It is a nice touch, considering you have never been on meds. He is trying to get ahead of the story, I said, taking the seat. He knows I found the trust documents, Tessa smiled. But it wasn't a happy expression. It was the grim satisfaction of a soldier recognizing a familiar enemy. I figured it was something like that. Grant doesn't scramble unless he's losing control. And he is scrambling. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. It was an older model, the screen cracked in the corner. You know why I broke up with Miles? It wasn't just the cheating, it was the gaslighting. He would say something terrible to me on Tuesday, and by Wednesday, he would swear on his mother's life he never said it. He would make me feel like I was the crazy one. So, I started recording him, just for me, just so I could play it back and know I wasn't losing my mind. She tapped the screen, scrolling through a list of file names. This was from a night about 6 months ago. He was wasted. We had just come back from that country club gala your dad loves so much. Miles was ranting about how much pressure he was under, how he had to live up to the Cruz name. She placed the phone on the table between us and hit play. The audio was grainy, filled with the background hum of a car engine, but the voice was unmistakably Miles. It was slurred, arrogant, and whining all at once. You don't get it, Tess. It is all strategy. Dad says we have to move assets to where they grow. Kenzie is just static. She is fine with her little life, but I am the investment. There was a pause in the recording, then Tessa's voice, calm and probing. But isn't that her money, Miles? The trust from your grandmother? Then Miles again, laughing a dark, ugly sound. It is all family money. Dad moved it. He had me sign some stuff. I don't know. Beneficiary shifts or whatever. He said Kenzie would just waste it on I don't know. Rent or books. He said it is for the family future. I am the future. Tessa stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath out of me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the laminate table, tracing a scratch in the surface with my fingernail. There is a specific kind of pain that comes with confirmation. It isn't sharp. It is heavy. It is the feeling of a door slamming shut on the last tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was all a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. Miles knew. He had known for months. He had driven his new car, eaten the dinners I cooked, and laughed in my face, all while knowing he was burning my future to fuel his own. He admitted it. I whispered. He admitted Grant told him to do it. There is more, Tessa said. She leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper. You need to know where to look. It is not just your money, Mackenzie. Miles talked about other things when he was drunk. He talked about a safe, not the big one in the office that everyone knows about, a small, fireproof box hidden in the floor of the master bedroom closet. Under the carpet, he said Grant keeps the Lydia files there. My stomach turned over. The Lydia files? My mother? Miles said Grant has deeds and accounts in your mom's name that she doesn't even know exist. He uses her identity to leverage loans or move cash around so his own credit looks clean. If the ship goes down, she is the one who drowns, not him. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning. This wasn't just theft. It was a hostage situation disguised as a marriage. We drove back to Boone in silence, the recording burning a hole in my pocket. When we got to Caleb Sterling's office, June was already there, pacing the waiting room. We played the recording for Caleb. He listened to it 3 times. His face remained impassive, but his eyes grew intense. This changes the landscape, Caleb said, leaning back in his chair. This isn't just a probate issue regarding a single trust. This is a pattern of systemic financial abuse and coercive control. If what this witness says about the hidden safe is true, your father is running a domestic Ponzi scheme with his own family members as the investors and the victims. He looked at me, his expression softening slightly. Mackenzie, I need you to understand what this means. The rent he asked you for? The $850? It was a test, I said, repeating what I had thought before. No, Caleb corrected. It was a tether. If he controls your mother's assets without her knowledge. And he drained your trust. Asking for rent was the final lock on the cage. By taking your liquid cash every month, he ensures you never have enough savings to move out. He keeps you dependent. He keeps you in the house where he can monitor you. If you leave, his house of cards gets shaky. He needs you there, under his thumb, believing you are the burden so you never look up and see you are actually the bank. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The rent wasn't about teaching me responsibility, it was about stripping me of the ability to escape. He wasn't afraid of my failure. He was terrified of my independence. I looked at June. She was sitting in the corner, her arms crossed, watching me with that fierce, protective gaze. He hates me, I said, my voice trembling. My own father hates me. June shook her head slowly. No, child. He doesn't hate you because you are less than Miles. He doesn't hate you because you are a disappointment. He hates you because you are the only one who sees him. You are the witness. And for a man who lives on lies, the truth is the most dangerous thing in the room. You aren't being punished for your flaws. You are being punished for your sight. I took a deep breath. The numbness was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just fighting for $12,000 anymore. I was fighting for the woman who sat at that dining table looking at her manicured nails because she was too terrified to look at her husband. What do we do? I asked Caleb. Caleb picked up a file folder. We escalate. I am going to file an emergency motion for discovery based on this new testimony. We are going to ask the judge to compel him to produce the contents of that safe. We are going to subpoena Miles for a deposition regarding the reallocation of funds, and we are going to send a copy of this recording to his lawyer, not to leak it, but to let them know that we know. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Grant Cruz thinks he is playing a game of poker, Caleb said. He thinks he can bluff us because you are his daughter and you will fold. But he just realized you aren't holding a pair of twos. You are holding a royal flush. Do it, I said. File it all. As we walked out of the office, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. My phone buzzed again. It was another message from home. I didn't even look at it. I didn't care what they had to say. The time for talking was over. The time for accounting had begun. The first domino fell on a Thursday morning. 3 days after Caleb filed the emergency motion, it wasn't a gavel banging in a courtroom. It was a polite, devastating email sent to Grant from the Savannah Preservation Society. He had sat on their board for 15 years, using the position to network and launder his reputation as a benevolent community pillar. But Caleb's motion had triggered an automatic audit clause in the Society's bylaws regarding members under investigation for financial impropriety. They asked him to step down temporarily. Conflict of interest, they called it, in Grant's world. That was a polite way of saying, "You are radioactive." I heard about it from Tessa, who was watching the local news feeds like a hawk. When she told me, I didn't cheer. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I was sitting on June's floor, packing an order for my shop, and I just felt a heavy, dull sadness. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. You don't clap for the dust. You just wonder why the foundation was built on sand in the first place. Then came Lydia. For decades, my mother had treated financial ignorance as a virtue, a way to keep her hands clean. But when Caleb secured the temporary freeze on the family assets, that ignorance stopped being a shield and became a cage. She called me, not to scold, but to ask a question that sounded foreign in her mouth. "Mackenzie," she said, her voice trembling, "I tried to buy groceries today. The card declined. The bank manager said there is a hold on the account ending in 338, but that is my account. Why is my account frozen because of a dispute with you?" "Because it's not just your account, Mom," I told her gently. "Grant has authority over it, and the court needs to know where the money came from." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a whisper. "But he told me that account was just for my inheritance from Aunt Sarah. He said he never touched it." "He lied," I said. "He used your name to move money he didn't want the IRS or us to see. You aren't just his wife, Mom. You are his shelter." She hung up without saying goodbye. But I knew the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a woman looking around her living room and realizing she didn't own the chair she was sitting in. Miles was unraveling in his own way. The investment Grant had groomed was proving to be volatile, without the steady drip of cash from the family accounts. Miles was suddenly facing the reality of his own incompetence. He texted me late one night, not with anger, but with confusion. "They came for the car." He wrote, "Repo guys. Said the lease payments were flagged. Dad said he bought it cash. He lied to me too. Kenzie, I thought I was the golden boy. Turns out I'm just another tax write-off." I looked at the message and felt a pang of pity. Miles had been arrogant, yes, and cruel by proxy, but he was also a victim. Grant had stolen my money, but he had stolen Miles's character. He had built a life for Miles that was entirely dependent on Grant's goodwill, ensuring that Miles could never actually leave him. We were both prisoners. I was just the one who had noticed the bars. While their world shrank, mine was beginning to breathe. June didn't let me wallow in the drama. "You are not a spectator to your own life," she told me, handing me a stack of shipping labels. "Get back to work." We reopened my online shop. I updated the inventory, photographing new designs in the natural light of June's sunroom. I sent emails to my old customer list, apologizing for the hiatus. The response was immediate. Orders started trickling in. Custom illustrations, digital prints, handmade journals. It wasn't millions of dollars. It was $40 here, $60 there. But every notification on my phone was a validation. It was money I earned, money that went into a bank account only I could access. It was the currency of freedom. By Friday afternoon, Caleb called with the big news. "The judge granted the preliminary injunction," he said, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. "We have frozen the trust, the joint accounts, and crucially, the contents of the safe deposit box Tessa told us about. Your father is locked out of his own war chest." "What does that mean for us?" I asked, wiping paint from my hands. "It means he is desperate," Caleb warned. "He has lost his leverage. He can't bribe you. He can't starve you out. And he can't hide the evidence anymore. Watch your back. Mackenzie, a narcissist without an audience is dangerous, but a narcissist without power is lethal." Caleb was right. 2 hours later, The phone rang. It was Grant. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, his voice was different. The booming authority was gone, replaced by a strained, tight tone that tried to mimic warmth, but only achieved a creepy intimacy. "Mackenzie. Sweetheart," he said. "This has gone too far. Lawyers. Courts, this isn't us. We are a family. I know I have been hard on you, but it was only because I wanted you to be tough. Look, your mother is a wreck. Miles is beside himself. I want to make this right. Just you and me. Come home tomorrow. No lawyers, no scenes. Just a father and daughter sitting down to fix things. I have a proposal that I think you will find very generous." I played the message for June. She narrowed her eyes. "He wants you in the house because that is where he writes the rules," she said. "He wants to isolate you from Caleb and me. He thinks if he can get you in that kitchen, he can bully you into signing a retraction." "I know," I said. I looked at the phone, then at the duffel bag in the corner. I thought about the note I had left. The message was still clear. He hadn't just hidden money. He had hidden the truth about who he was. And if I didn't go back, if I just let the lawyers handle it from a distance, he would spin a story that I was a coward who attacked from afar. He would die believing he was the victim. "I'm going," I said. June started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm going, but I'm not going alone, and I'm not going to negotiate. I'm going to finish it," I called Caleb. "Set it up," I told him. "Tell him I agree to meet, but tell him I am bringing counsel, and tell him if he tries to bar you from the door, the deal is off." Caleb hesitated. "Mackenzie, seeing him might be traumatic. You don't have to do this in person." "Yes, I do," I said, looking out at the mountains that had sheltered me for the last week. I need to look him in the eye when he realizes he lost. I need him to see that the daughter he tried to erase is the one rewriting the ending. I packed a small bag. Not a bag for running away this time, but a bag for a business trip. I packed my evidence folder. I packed the recording Tessa gave me, and I packed the original receipt, the note I had left by the coffee maker. I wasn't going back to reconcile. I wasn't going back to hear his apology, because I knew he didn't have one to give. I was going back to close the ledger. I was going back to evict him from my head, once and for all. The drive back to Savannah would take 6 hours. I would arrive just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the house that had been my prison. It was fitting. I wanted him to see the sun go down on his empire. The rain was a cliché, a steady gray drizzle that slicked the driveway of the house I used to call home. But the cold settling in my stomach had nothing to do with the weather. I stepped out of Caleb's car, the gravel crunching under my boots, a sound I had spent 22 years trying to avoid making. This time, I didn't care who heard me. To my left, June adjusted her raincoat, her face set in a grim line of determination. To my right, Caleb carried a thick black briefcase that contained the dissection of my father's lies. We walked up the path in a phalanx. I wasn't the daughter returning. I was the consequences arriving. I didn't knock. I rang the bell. Once, long and hard. Grant opened the door almost immediately. He was wearing his favorite cashmere sweater, holding a tumbler of scotch, and he looked bored. He didn't look like a man whose assets had been frozen by a court order. He looked like a man who was annoyed that his dinner plans were being delayed. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking the entrance, and offered a thin, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "The prodigal daughter returns. Did you come to apologize for the drama, Mackenzie? Or did you just run out of money?" I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him and realized, with a jolt of shock, that he looked smaller than I remembered. "We are not here to apologize, Mr. Cruz," Caleb said, stepping forward. "And we are not here to chat on the porch. We are here to conduct a deposition of assets." Grant's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he stepped back, sweeping his arm wide in a mock gesture of hospitality. "By all means, come in," Let's get this farce over with so I can call the sheriff about harassment. The house smelled exactly the same, lemon polish and expensive candles. But it felt different. It felt fragile. We walked into the living room. Miles was there, sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking like a deflation of his former self. He held a beer bottle loosely in his hands, staring at the floor. He didn't look up when I entered. Lydia was nowhere to be seen. Grant took his seat in the high-backed leather armchair, the throne from which he had ruled our lives. "Make it quick," he snapped. "I have a reputation to maintain, even if my daughter is intent on destroying it with her delusions." Caleb didn't sit. He walked to the coffee table and opened his briefcase. He laid out 3 documents, side by side, with the precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. "Document 1, Caleb said, pointing to a bank transfer record. $12,000 moved from the Evelyn Cruz Trust to an account controlled by Miles Cruz, authorized by a signature that forensic experts verify is a forgery or obtained under duress. Document 2, a power of attorney form granting you control over Lydia Cruz's inheritance, dated 3 days after her mother's funeral, when she was heavily medicated. Document 3, a sworn affidavit from Tessa Lane regarding a hidden safe in this house containing deeds to properties my client believes were purchased with stolen funds." Grant laughed. It was a dry barking sound. "Tessa? The jealous ex-girlfriend? You are basing this on the word of a girl Miles dumped? And a signature? Mackenzie signed that freely. She wanted to help her brother. We are a family. We help each other. Something you clearly forgot." He turned his gaze on me, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I clothed you," Grant hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I fed you. I put a roof over your head for 2 decades. I gave you a car. I bought my car," I interrupted. My voice was quiet, steady. "I paid for the gas. I paid for the insurance. And the roof? You just tried to charge me $850 a month for it. It was a lesson." Grant slammed his hand on the armrest. "A lesson in gratitude. You are unstable. Mackenzie, everyone knows it. You run off in the middle of the night. You harass your mother. You make up stories. If you push this, I will cut you off completely. You will never see a dime of inheritance. You will be dead to this family." I looked at him, and I felt nothing. The fear was gone. The guilt was gone. "You can't cut me off, Dad," I said, "because I was never really connected. I was just an employee you forgot to pay. And I'm not here for an inheritance. I'm here to take back what you already stole. You ungrateful little—" "Grant," the voice came from the hallway. It was barely a whisper, but it stopped him cold. Lydia stood in the doorway. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, something I had never seen in public. She was holding a stack of unopened envelopes, bank notices. The ones Caleb's motion had forced the bank to mail to the house instead of Grant's P.O. box. She walked into the room, her steps unsteady. She didn't look at me. She looked at Grant. "Why is my name on a mortgage for a condo in Florida?" she asked. Her voice cracked. I opened these. "Grant, why do I own a condo in Florida that I have never seen?" Grant's face shifted. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a frantic, scrambling look. "Lydia, honey, don't read those. Those are complicated tax shelters. It is for your benefit. I handle the details so you don't have to worry." "I want to worry!" she screamed. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my mother raise her voice. "I am 55 years old, and I don't know how much money I have. You told me we were broke. You told me we couldn't afford to help Mackenzie with school. But there is $500,000 in this account." Miles looked up, his face pale. "Dad, you said the business was struggling. You said that is why you needed my trust fund." "It was." Grant stood up, cornered. He looked from Lydia to Miles, and then his eyes landed on me. The hatred in his gaze was pure, distilled poison. "This is what she does. She poisons everything. We were fine. We were a happy family until she started digging. She is ruining us." "I am not ruining us," I said. "I am exposing you." "You are destroying this house," Grant roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Because of you, this house is going to fall." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, "for the admission." "What admission?" Grant spat. "That this house," I said, meeting his eyes, "was built on the condition that I stayed silent, that my submission was the structural integrity of your life. You aren't afraid I'm unstable. Dad, you're afraid I'm free." Grant's chest heaved. He looked at Miles, pleading for support. "Miles, tell her to stop." Miles looked at his father, then at the beer bottle in his hand. He set the bottle down on the coaster. "I didn't know about the Florida condo, Dad, and I didn't know you made Mom sign those papers when she was grieving." Miles looked at me. "I took the money. Kenzie, I shouldn't have, but I didn't know he was stealing it from you to give to me." "You knew enough," I said, "but that is for later." Grant slumped back into his chair, realizing the room had turned. But he still had that gleam in his eye, the look of a man who thinks he has one last card to play. "You can't prove intent," he muttered. "It is all hearsay. I can drag this out in court for years. I will bankrupt you with legal fees before you ever see a cent." Caleb smiled. It was a cold, professional smile. He reached into his briefcase one last time. "We anticipated that," Caleb said, "which is why we saved the best for last." He pulled out a sealed, yellowed envelope. It wasn't a bank statement. It was old. The handwriting on the front was shaky but elegant. "Your mother, Evelyn, was a very thorough woman, Mr. Cruz," Caleb said, holding the envelope up. "She left this with her personal attorney, with instructions that it only be released if her granddaughter ever filed a formal complaint against you." Grant's face went the color of ash. He knew that handwriting. "This is not a financial record," Caleb continued, his voice lowering to a hush. "This is a character statement. A notarized confession of what you did to your late wife's estate 20 years ago. Evelyn wrote it all down, every threat, every forged check. She calls it her insurance policy against a bully." Caleb placed the envelope on the table, right in the center, between the Scotch glass and the forged documents. "If we open this," Caleb said, "we are not talking about civil court anymore. Grant, we are talking about the district attorney. We are talking about prison." I watched my father stare at the envelope. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly afraid. "So," Caleb said, folding his hands, "do you want to negotiate in the light? Or do you want me to open the letter?" Caleb Sterling did not open the envelope with a flourish. He opened it with the somber respect one gives to a weapon of war. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery, covered in the tight, spidery script of a woman who knew her time was short, but her mind was sharp. Grant reached for it, but Caleb pulled it back. He read aloud, his voice cutting through the humid air of the living room. "To my granddaughter Mackenzie," Caleb read, "if you are reading this, it means your father has finally done what I always feared he would do. He has tried to consume you to feed his own vanity. Grant thinks he is a clever man, but he is a predictable one. He has likely moved your trust funds into accounts under his control, claiming family necessity. He has likely bullied your mother into silence, but he forgot that I was the one who taught him how to balance a ledger. Attached to this letter is a notarized affidavit detailing the exact structure of the initial trust, including a clause that explicitly states any attempt by the trustee to commingle these funds with personal assets constitutes immediate fraud and triggers a mandatory audit of his entire estate." Grant sank back into his leather chair, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost haunting his own life. The silence in the room was absolute. "You see, Grant," I said, stepping forward, "you thought the note I left by the coffee maker that morning was just a tantrum. You thought it was just a list of grievances, but it was not. It was bait." He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "I knew exactly what you would do when you read it," I continued, my voice steady. "I knew you would panic. I knew you would call everyone in town to call me crazy. I knew you would leave threatening voicemails. I knew you would text Miles and tell him to keep quiet. And every single one of those reactions was recorded by reacting to my note. You created the timeline of harassment that proves you were trying to cover up a crime. You didn't just steal my money, you incriminated yourself trying to keep it." Caleb placed the document on the table. "Here is the offer. Option A. You sign a full admission of financial mismanagement. You restore the $12,000 to the trust, plus interest. You step down as executor of your wife's assets immediately, and you sign a restitution agreement. If you do this, we file it privately, and you avoid jail." "Option B," Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. "We leave right now. We walk straight to the district attorney's office with this letter. The bank records, and the recordings of you threatening your daughter. You will be indicted for fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse regarding Lydia's accounts. You will lose your license to practice. You will lose this house, and you will go to prison." Grant looked around the room, desperate for an ally. He looked at Lydia. "Lydia, tell them," he pleaded. "Tell them this is insane. We are a team." Lydia stood up. She looked at the man she had spent 30 years serving, the man who had turned her into a ghost in her own home. She walked over to the table, picked up the stack of bank notices she had opened, and dropped them into his lap. "We are not a team, Grant," she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud. "We are a hostage situation. I am done. I am hiring my own lawyer tomorrow. I want a forensic accounting of everything you have done in my name, and I want a separation." Grant gasped, as if she had physically struck him. "You can't. You wouldn't survive without me." "I have been surviving you for decades," she said. "I think I will be just fine." Then, the room turned to Miles. He was still holding his beer, looking at the floor. He stood up slowly. He looked at the new car keys sitting on the mantel, the symbol of his success, the bribe for his silence. "I'll sign," Miles said. Grant whipped his head around. "What?" "I'll sign an affidavit," Miles said, looking his father in the eye for the first time in his life. "I knew the money wasn't mine. I mean, I tried to pretend I didn't, but I knew I can't keep the car, Dad, and I can't keep the tuition money. I will work. I will pay it back. I don't want to be the guy who needs his sister's savings to pretend he is a success." Grant looked at his son, then at his wife, and finally at me. The walls were not falling. They had already fallen. He was sitting in the rubble. "Why?" Grant whispered, looking at me with a mixture of hatred and grudging awe. "Why couldn't you just be happy for him? Why did you have to ruin it?" "I didn't ruin it," I said. "I just turned on the lights." "I was afraid," Grant admitted. And it was the first honest thing he had said in years. His voice was small, stripped of its bluster. "I was afraid because you are exactly like Evelyn. You see everything. If you succeeded on your own, without my help, it would prove that I wasn't necessary. It would prove that I was just in the way." I looked at him, at this small, terrified man who had spent his life building a fortress out of other people's money. I realized I didn't need his apology. I didn't even need his confession. I just needed him to be powerless over me. "You were in the way," I said softly, "but you aren't anymore." Grant signed the papers. His hand shook, the pen scratching against the paper like a dying insect. 2 months later, the dust had settled. The settlement was finalized. I received the full restoration of my trust fund, plus damages, but I didn't keep all of it. I took a significant portion of the damages and used it to seed a small nonprofit organization called the Evelyn Initiative. It provides legal aid and emergency housing grants for young adults trying to escape financial abuse in their own families. It was my way of ensuring that the next time someone like Grant tried to use money as a leash, there would be a pair of scissors waiting. Lydia didn't move out of the house immediately, but she changed it. She painted over the sterile beige walls with bright, vibrant colors. She unlocked the filing cabinets. She started hosting book clubs and dinners where people actually laughed instead of networked. The house was no longer a monument to Grant's ego. It was a home. Grant moved into a small apartment across town, spending his days dealing with the auditors who were slowly dismantling his business. As for me, I went back to Boone. I used the rest of the money to rent a larger studio space for my shop. I filled it with light, with plants, and with the noise of happy customers. I was no longer the girl who filled the gaps. I was the girl who built the foundation. On the wall of my new office, framed in simple black wood, hangs a piece of paper. It is the original note I left by the coffee maker at 4:11 in the morning. Rent, $850. Status, declined. I keep it there not to relive the pain, but to remember the exact moment I chose to stop financing my own place in their world. It's my receipt, proof that I paid once, and walked away free. He drove off with the keys. I walked away with the receipt. But what I carried out of that house wasn't a duffel bag of clothes. It was the right to step out of their little production, and what I left behind wasn't property. It was the truth, sitting in the open where no one could pretend not to see it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from today. So drop a comment with your location and share your thoughts on Mackenzie's journey. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and tap that hype button so we can share this message with even more people.